Hi, Jared. Thank you so much for helping my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
So my name is Jared Frankle. I have been working out at the Kennedy Space Center ever since 2021. So I've been out there for almost about 2 years now. I work out there as an access control monitor, and I'm just a big fan of all things space exploration. Been a big fan since I was little. I remember the first time we went to Kennedy Space Center as a family. I still got a old photo of me standing next to one of the J2 engines they had out there at the rocket garden as a little kid.
Was there a particular family member or friend or event that you can trace back as the seed to that interest?
So I know my career in relation to spaceflight started when I met Ken Kramer. I don't know if you know him, but he's a guy who usually sells his photographs. He's a launch photographer at like an inn here in Titusville. And so we came up to Orlando one time for my brother because he was looking at colleges in the area, and he was at the hotel that we were staying at. So I went and talked to him and looked at his photos and stuff like that. And when I saw him, I was like, "That's what I want to do. I want to do that." So that kind of kickstarted that, and eventually I ended up getting a spot in media. So I ended up being able to go out and take photos like he did, and eventually through like connections and things like that, I was ended up actually getting a job at the center in what I'm doing now.
Did you get to see the Artemis 1 launch?
Yep, I watched it from the LCC parking lot. So I was right there about 3 miles away from it.
What was that like?
It was loud. It was very bright. It was probably the brightest launch I'd ever saw. Those solids really put out a lot of light. It was just like an amazing feeling watching the thing that I worked on for almost like a year finally go off towards the moon, and then getting to see it when it came back as well was also a great feeling because we got to work with the capsule during the deservicing process at the MPPF. So like actually getting to see that thing that like I touched and worked with in the VAB for a long time was an amazing feeling.
Talking about feelings, during the launch, did you feel any heat from the launch pad?
Um, not really. I couldn't didn't feel like I felt any heat, but I could feel like the feelings everybody around me. Everybody kind of let out this big sigh of relief when the thing finally lifted off.
Yeah, because I guess this is like the third major launch attempts, and then they had like some holds because of a leak, and they had to send in the red
Hmm.
team, and there's a lot of people that are like thinking, oh, it's gonna scrub again. So
Yeah, I was getting nervous when they had to send the red team out to fix those packing nuts on the skid, but it ended up working out, which was good.
absolutely, yeah. Um, so before, like, do you remember when you learned that we were going back to the moon?
It was probably around the time of like when the Constellation program was a thing. I remember seeing like YouTube videos and animations about like what that was going to be like, but I guess I was a little bit slow because I was still thinking that was what we were doing, even though it was canceled. I guess I didn't know it was canceled at the time, so I kept thinking like this is how we're going back to the moon, and then a while later I was like, oh wait, this is not a thing anymore. And then we had a space launch system after that, so then I came more interested in that.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking back to those constellation timelines. I think
Hmm.
2020 we were supposed to have a moon base.
Yeah, that's I don't know if that would have happened, but would have been nice if that did.
Um, so when you talk to people about us going back to the moon, what are the questions that they usually ask you?
Um, I don't know. I don't really get asked often a lot about it, but let me see. What's a question I usually get asked?
A question I get asked is, why are we going? Often, I was just wondering how you answer that.
Oh yeah, I think I've gotten asked that one before. Usually I'll say like we're going back, not the just like put a flag on there, but this time it's actually to use what we've learned through like research, advances in science and engineering, and our like work with the International Space Station to like apply that to actually like going out there and living on the moon, not just going there for a short time, actually establishing bases eventually with the goal of like going on to Mars. I know they had plans for that during the Apollo program, but I think that if they attempted it, it might not have worked out because our knowledge of like long duration human spaceflight was very shallow at the time. Like the most anybody had been in space was a few weeks, and that was mostly like the Apollo missions and what few space stations there were that the Soviets put up. So it was again our understanding of like doing something like that was not as mature as it is now. So I think now it's a lot more feasible, and I think we're heading in the right direction.
Uh, yeah, I keep thinking that it really depends upon people's answer to this next question I'd like to ask people, and that is, where do you see the future of humanity, say like in 200 years? And I'm curious, how do you see humanity in 200 years?
Well, I hope in 200 years, we've advanced a lot, both technologically and socially. And I think, especially for space colonization in the future, one of the big things that we need to figure out is how not to take the problems we have here on Earth and multiply them wherever else we go, because it's pretty obvious we haven't really figured out how to get along still here on Earth. So that's definitely going to be one of the big challenges for advancing as a civilization out into space in the future. So that's one of the big things I'm hoping for, is that in that 200 years we figure out how to work with each other better, and that in turn will help space colonization be a little bit more like meshed together. I think it'll help things go a lot smoother. And with colonization, I think it also presents like an idea for like starting new, or like grounds for starting new, because here on Earth it's very like difficult to change things because everything's so like set and like being the way it is for a long time. It's difficult to like change like long standing traditions and statutes and things like that. But when we go out and explore like this and try to settle the moon and eventually Mars, it's a lot easier to change how things are because it's a new beginning. Like nobody lives there. All these people haven't been like living together in this place out there. So we can create new rules, maybe figure out how to live together better. I mean, we'll have to in order to survive out there.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think that a lot of the rules we have here on Earth that help us get along day to day may break down completely whenever you're
Mhm.
living in very small communities and hostile environments like Moon and Mars. But to your point, those first people, what a an awesome responsibility to create those new rules and new traditions, because they get to do it new, but the people after them, now they will most likely follow their pattern. And
Mhm.
yeah. So I guess if you were a colonist on the moon or Mars and you could change something or set a new tradition or change a rule, do you have any in mind that you would do?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. I'm not really that much into politics, so I can't really say for sure, but I know just like respect, like it's like a mutual respect would be a big one, because it out there you're gonna have to like have respect for everybody. You can't be fighting all the time or belittling people. So placing a big emphasis on respect and like understanding each other is is gonna be very important.
That makes sense. But in 200 years, do you think we have people living their lives on places like on Moon and Mars and having children there and carrying on just with their daily lives like we do here on Earth? Or do you think it's going to take longer or quicker? What do you think?
That I cannot say. I mean, right now we're at the very, 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 very edge of that, like just beginning that. Like we're right on the very edge of that. So we're not right now, I don't think we're anywhere near close to like something like that. But in the future, I hope that it's definitely something that, happens. And of course, we're gonna have to figure out how to utilize resources better in order to do that and make much more like rapid means of transportation between here and like the moon and Mars and stuff like that. Something, closer to like a science fiction movie style things, like where like transportation is to space is more like that of an airplane. Like even Starship in its current form right now isn't, in my opinion, isn't like close to that goal. It's a start, but there needs to be improvements. Eventually, there needs to be something better. Especially like if we can find a way to get rid of reliance on chemical rockets, like if we can develop a new, more reliable fuel efficient technology that can be used to like mass produce space transportation, that would be a huge breakthrough that definitely would be a huge kickstart to that goal.
Um, if you, well, I guess, did you see the Inspiration 4 launch?
Yes,
And did you attempt to be on Inspiration 4?
I did apply. Of course, I didn't get very far, which wasn't very surprising to me.
Yeah, I felt very generous towards St. Jude during the month of February that year.
Mhm.
Um, but I also did not get selected. Um, yeah. Well, what did you think about that trip, that mission?
I thought it was kind of interesting, the idea that more civilians are going into space. But again, at the end of the day, it was more of like a stunt than it was a demonstration of like common civilian space flight. That's my opinion on it. Because it had to be set up by somebody who had the money to fund a mission, and then they selected people at random. It's not really like people going out into space to work, as like regular civilians and stuff like that. Like we drive our car to work and things like that. It was, yeah, more almost like an event or a stunt or something like that. But it's a start.
Yeah, we definitely need the price of space
Hmm.
travel to come down before we see any real advances, I guess.
Hmm. And again, like Dragon, like those are mostly for sending people to the International Space Station. Again, it's not something like Starship, which is supposed to take many people into space at one time.
I even heard as many like 100 at a time, which
Hmm.
be kind of interesting to see what those accommodations would look like. So if somebody offered you a trip to space today, it sounds like you would take it.
I definitely would. It would be an interesting experience.
If you had a choice between like a suborbital flight, say on New Shepard, or an Inspiration 4 styled flight, or a Dear Moon style flight, or being the first colonist to Mars, like how would you go about choosing?
Well, given the options that are available now, obviously I would choose the orbital flight. But I don't know, I might be a little bit apprehensive about going to Mars, especially if I was the first person. It sounds a little bit more daunting than it seems. A lot of weight on your shoulders and a lot of possibility of things going wrong.
Absolutely, that's true. Well, Jared, those were pretty much the questions I had. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about, or did you have any questions for me?
Um, I know when you were talking about like people going to the moon and stuff like that and learning how to live together, I guess like one of the things that a lot of people sometimes overlook is the analog missions that NASA does, where essentially like they'll lock a bunch of people inside like a mock space habitat for like several months to a year at a time. And those are, really important because it's like psychology. The psychology of missions is a big thing, and like making sure people don't start getting super mad at each other over the course of this year in this very small space, and seeing how well people do like in those claustrophobic conditions, saying the same exact people for like an entire year, not being able to really go outside or anything like that. Like on the journey to Mars, you're going to be in a spacecraft with those other people for quite a while. It's not like a car ride across the states or something like that. It's a very long trip in a very small space. So I think that's one of the things that kind of gets overlooked. And I actually tried to apply to participate in one once, but I think they want people that are a little bit more higher standing in education than what I have.
Which ones have you applied to?
I applied to one of their Mars ones. I don't exactly remember what it was, but I didn't get in, which again wasn't really surprising to me. They want more people that are, like closer to like qualifying as astronauts for those studies because they're actual like, scientific studies.
I Have you heard of high seas out there in Hawaii?
I think I think so.
Yeah, at our Space Society meeting yesterday, we had a participant who went on like I guess mission 5 back in 2017, and he was like there for 8 months. He was talking about it, but you're right. There's a lot of challenges in being in a confined space,
Hmm.
cut off from kind of like the bigger bulk of humanity, and having to work with. I think he had 6 people total, so him and 5 others. Either you become the best of friends or the worst of friends.
Yeah. Isn't that the one where they have you like in an underwater like habitat? Or is that a
Oh, that
different
one
one?
is, I think that's called Nemo, and I think that's off
Hmm.
of the coast of Florida,
Hmm.
actually. Yeah. The high seas stands for Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation.
Hmm.
Analog simulation. So, um, but yeah, that's that.
Are you planning to come to Florida for Artemis 2 when it happens?
I definitely would like to. Um, I'm debating between Florida or mission control.
Hmm.
So
I mean, there's nothing that beats getting to see the rocket. I mean, mission control is nice, but actually being there with the rocket is definitely, in my opinion, the best experience.
it is. That's true. Yeah. I mean, kind of my dream would be to be in mission control the next time that the people are stepping on the moon. But I think
Hmm.
a lot of people want to be there, so I'm not sure
Yeah.
how realistic that is. But
I probably won't be there for Artemis 2 because I'm trying to get on the recovery crew.
oh,
So if I
okay,
do get selected to be ship side, I will have to leave before the launch because they go out before the launch since there's people on it this time.
okay, and that makes sense because maybe they have to abort and then you have to
Hmm.
recover the capsule
Yeah.
much earlier than after the orbit around the moon.
So it'll be hopefully I'm on the ship because then I'll get to see the astronauts come back from the moon, which will be an amazing experience.
That is true. Yeah, the first people to come back from the moon since 1972.
Hmm.
That's 50, 52 years ago. So
It's been a long time,
it has.
too
Uh,
long.
well, Jared, thank you so much for meeting with me. And I'm really glad that you got to participate in my project.
Thank you very much for having me, Nathan. It was a pleasure.
And if you know anybody else, I have more than 500 more days to the end of 2024. So
All right, well, I'll look around and see if I can send somebody your way.
I really appreciate that. Well, have a good day.
You as well.